definitely part of discovery to try to find what those red flags are so that you can address them as quickly as possible. Certainly, one of the questions I ask is if it's a new role, the engineering leaders and product leaders aware of the new role, and are they supportive of the new role? Because if it's, if you bring in another security person and nobody's really understanding why it's happening, then that's a whole lot of groundwork that I'm going to have to do at the beginning to make sure that I'm getting their understanding and buy-in. If I'm coming in and the role already existed, the team already existed, I've got to be aware of what is the current perception of that program. Were there negative impacts? Am I going to have to address those?
Welcome to Season 4 of The Elephant in AppSec, the podcast to explore, challenge, and boldly face the AppSec elephants in the room. I'm Alexandra, your host, AppSec enthusiast, and growth manager at Escape. Today, I'm joined by Sean Finley, an experienced AppSec leader with deep expertise in AppSec security operations, vulnerability management, and governance. Sean's AppSec career started at GEICO, one of the most recognizable names in the US insurance. He made the leap from business analyst to the company's very first AppSec engineer, teaching himself everything along the way. In this episode, we explore what inspired that transition, how to spot red flags that doom security programs before they start, and why Sean believes there are far better investments than SAST. We also dive into his approach for working with engineering teams, especially when their initial designs could put their organization at risk, and how to turn a no into a secure yes. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it on your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. It's the best way to avoid missing future episodes. And with that, get ready to hear Sean's opinions. Dive right in. Hi, Sean. I'm super excited to have you on the Elephant and AppSec podcast. Thanks a lot for finding the time and coming to share your knowledge and I guess your passions about the Route 60. I don't think we're going to talk about it on a podcast, but I guess behind me is also the US landscape for
That on
sure.
Route 66.
Okay, well,
In
I've
Arizona,
never been
northern
on
Arizona,
one.
yeah, it would
Yeah,
look like that.
we kind of have some similarities in the background. I saw you had a very unique story, unique background. I think you started at the very famous United States government insurance company that like everyone knows because they run a lot of the advertisements throughout the past years. I think even in early 2000s, so it's like more than 25 years ago. That you started there as a testing system analyst, right? And
Yes.
then you became their first ever AppSec engineer, and you grew your AppSec career from that experience. And you had to learn everything from scratch by yourself. Right now, people use ChatGPT to learn. A lot of YouTube videos are available, a lot of trainings. Like, how did you 20 years ago, basically, learned everything on yourself?
Well, thanks for having me, Alexandra. It's great to be here. Yeah, the start to my career was very interesting. I worked at GEICO for a very long time. Started out just doing customer service in the insurance center and got a chance to get into the technical side of things soon after college. And I was a business analyst for a long time, doing a lot of UI, UX, system testing, things like that. And I always I always liked the technical side of building software, so I always enjoyed having those deep dive conversations with engineers that I would work with about, how does the code work? Why you do it this way, and things like that. And after about 15 years or so on the business analyst side, Geico was creating its first application security team, and I knew a few of the folks, the manager and the lead engineer who were going to be starting that team. They were engineers I had worked with years before. We had a good relationship, and I came to him. I said, you're obviously building this with internal talent. We're all going to have to kind of learn as we go. And I'd love an opportunity to do it. It sounds extremely interesting. And so they brought me on. I was the first. They hired a few of us right away, and I was the first one. Then a couple of days later, another one joined. And
Okay.
it was my very first day on the team. We were observing traffic from a location in Russia that was known for cybercrime, and it just felt like being in a movie or a TV show, about spy and espionage and technical crime, and it was just it was so fun. I was hooked at that moment. Like security was definitely going to be something I think I was going to enjoy for the rest of my working career. So to answer your question about, how did I approach sort of building up my knowledge? None of us knew what we were doing. Nobody came from a security background. We were all learning it together. And so, not having things like Chat GPT or the industry wasn't as large as it is today. And so it really was, pursuing certifications. I got my Security Plus like right away just to get some baseline
Okay.
knowledge in place, and, did a couple of different, more proprietary sort of certifications and some of the technologies that we were using. And then just a lot of, like to say, Google foo, looking on Google and searching for topics. If I was seeing a path traversal for the very first time and I didn't know what exactly that was and what the ways to, prevent that were, it was just a lot of Google searches. And then it was going and having conversations with the developer responsible for that code, and having a conversation like, okay, well, why did you do it this way? Were you aware of, this, or this? And it was just a lot of hands on keyboard sort of, interactions with people, looking up content, and just building up a foundation of knowledge over time. It's something that I think a lot of, companies don't make time for, but I was, extremely appreciative that the approach that the company took was to bring internal talent who they thought could fill these roles and allow them to grow and train. I think it leads me to my passion of building up people I work with and people who report to me in their careers, because I had an opportunity to do that very early on in my security career.
I think it's still now it's getting more and more rare because there is a pressure to push something in the wild because we have AI, we're being assisted by AI, so you have to like just getting everything like what you can out of the wild, and there is not much time for learning something new, and it's a kind of status quo that you have to do it in your free time and go the courses in your free time, but it lasts during the work time. Like, did your approach to learning change in a way? Like how, for example, now, especially in AppSec, we always get new topics to learn about. Now it's agentic, AI agent, like AI agents, MCPs, like so many new topics that pop up every year. Did the way you learn change?
I don't think it's changed a lot once I got past sort of that like baseline knowledge. Like, I started to learn about people who are influencing the industry and how to find their information. I mean, there was certainly things like websites you could look to, like a SANS site or something like that. But there were people early on in my career who I found who are still really active in the cybersecurity field. And those were people that I would pay attention to, and I would look and see who they're paying attention to. And I would kind of build out sort of my own, feed, whether it be, for education or threat intel or things like that. Like, I would build out my own. In the old days, when I would use Twitter, often I would build lists, and then I would have like, different categories and different, accounts that I would follow to learn about particular subjects or particular people. And I still tend to do all of that. Some of the, people have come and gone as people change careers, but I think for the most part, I still look to industry leaders, whether it be organizations or people, to help me understand, how things are changing. Because, there's not always the tech stack I work with is not what everybody else is working with. And so if I only focus squarely on my tech stack, then I might not learn about some of the things that are happening on the bleeding edge. And so, I think looking outside my space is something that I still kind of do in pretty much the same way. Certainly the topics have changed, and I think the speed at which things are changing is definitely impacting, my ability to stay on top of things. And so it's becoming and more of a challenge to stay on top of all the things that are going on, and where those, key risks are for our organization.
What are specific leaders that you follow, or would you recommend others to follow?
I mean, two that come to mind that were really important in my early career, and I still pay close attention to, are like Troy Hunt and Tanya Janka, Jim Manico. I've always enjoyed the content they provide, the accessibility and understandability that they present with information, and those are definitely some of my favorites in my career.
Okay, yeah, I think a lot of people actually named Tanya Janka for sure when she was
Yeah.
on the podcast as
Yeah, I
well,
saw that.
because I think, yeah, it's one of the first AppSec books that I read because we had it as well in office. I mean, my first one was API Security by Corey J. Ball, but then, yeah, the second one was the Tanya Janka book that's specifically more AppSec focused because right now, for a new book on secure coding is definitely more dedicated to developers that you can share with developers. And actually gave like the send copy to our development team so they can read and hopefully learn more
Yeah.
from it. Because yeah, for me, since I don't code day to day, it's maybe less practical knowledge, but it definitely can distill complicated topics in a way that's approachable to different audiences. And that's very nice. And you started also, you mentioned from a more business analytics point of view. Do you think it also contributes right now, contributed a lot to the fact that you consider security more as the way of like that security should be a lot about understanding the business and serving the business in a way? Is there this? It actually wasn't a big impact for you?
I think at first I didn't realize how much of an impact it was. I think now, as I've grown in my career and I've sort of formalized my own opinions about it, I think I definitely see the impact of that more and more. I think one thing that really helped me with early on was empathy with the software teams that I was working with, because having worked as part of a software team, even though I wasn't writing the code, I understood the process of the SDLC. I understood the asks of an engineering team and the timelines that they were facing, and so that helped me, I think, understand. When I came with my list of all the things that security's asking, like I understood that I wasn't the only thing that they were dealing with that day, and so I think that part of it probably has been a bigger impact early on in my career and really helped me build positive relationships with engineering teams.
How do you find good balance about pushing? They're not the only thing that they do, throughout the day versus for you, what's important? Like how many, say, issues do you think is realistic to ask from developers to fix throughout the week?
I think it's an organization by organization
Mm.
answer. And it probably changes by seasons, depending upon the feature release schedule of an organization and how that works. There's often an ebb and flow as to how many security bugs might be able to get addressed. And you kind of have to understand the way the business works, product is doing, what the objectives are with their products, and working with that knowledge to make plans with engineering teams as to where the best fit is for addressing issues, making sure they're aware that, a 0 day might pop up and you can't just fill your sprint during sprint planning with all kinds of, business feature requests. And then now you're suddenly feeling like you're going to lose out on a business initiative because a 0 day has happened. Like
Mhm.
there needs to be those conversations about, unexpected things happen in software, and just make sure you have a bucket that if something happens, what might need to get pushed to sprint, or what might need to get dropped, things like that. So I really do think it's important for me as an AppSec professional and a leader to understand what the business is doing and making sure I'm having those conversations in advance of those things coming up so that product and engineering know I might come unexpectedly with,
A
an
lot
ask
of demands.
that is critical. Like it's not just something you have to plan for, it's something you have to drop something for to do.
Mhm.
And, I think most people are understanding as long as you prepare them for it, and that you're doing your best to not come to the well and ask too often for those things. Like planning is definitely your friend. Get yourself involved in product planning, engineering planning, sprint planning for the products so that you can have those conversations about, when things should happen, how many things should happen at once. Maybe this sprint it's a couple of points, and next sprint, hey, we've got, more like 10 points that we can give you, and what things should we work on. I think those are all really, really good conversations to be having.
And these are conversations that you usually have on your side with the actual engineering leaderships. or dedicated developers on each team? Because quite often, I think you mentioned as well that without, the leadership buy-in, I think that was one of your controversial takes, that AppSec is kind of just finding vulnerabilities, producing the reports, but actually none of the actions are going to be taken. Do you work then and collaborate with the team leaders, with product managers maybe as well, because they're the one who decide, kind of sometimes assign tasks to developers?
Yeah.
Who do you need to get buy-in from?
I mean, and when I talk about, business leaders, it could be different for every organization. Sometimes there's a product team who's driving the sprint schedule. Maybe engineering is driving the sprint schedule. I think you kind of need to understand who those business leaders are that you need to be working with. But I think that wherever it is in your organization, that understanding who is sort of building out the sprint planning, or where time is being spent, that you're having conversations with them about what you're seeing, whether it be tools or pen tests or what have you, what you're seeing as vulnerabilities for a particular product, and that you're able to really talk to them about what risk that's being presented to the business with those issues. And being able to understand that risk means monetary impact to the business. We think a lot about our vulnerabilities and exploitability, but the business is thinking about, am I going to lose money? Am I going to lose reputation? Am I, things that are going to cost to the business. And so I think you need to be able to speak to that translation from vulnerability to risk so that they understand the importance of addressing something.
Yeah, do you think in this case you mean speaking, for example, to someone who's CISO level, or someone who is a product leader? Because developers don't really care that much about, or the engineering team leaders about monitoring
Yeah, it's definitely a
impact.
leadership. I think it's definitely a leadership question because, I mean, I've rarely found in my career engineers who are the ones writing and fixing code that, I won't say they don't care, but they don't have a preference, let's say, about what they're working on. They're working items in a sprint. They have their list of things that are assigned to them, and they're looking to get those things done, whether it be a performance bug, a security bug, doesn't matter. But leadership, it needs to be the one that's a part of it, whether that be a product manager or a product VP or an engineering tech lead, whatever the situation is in your organization for, who's making decisions on what's getting prioritized and when. Those are the people you really need to be engaging with to make sure they understand, to be able to balance the advantageous business features they're trying to push alongside of the security bugs that you're trying to get addressed so that you're reducing risk. And to talk more about, sort of the understanding of impacts to business, I think for a lot of my career, security has been sort of viewed as like a cost center. It's, something that the business pays for, but it's not necessarily making them money. And I think we need to make sure that we're explaining that, obviously we're not selling security, but by us fixing security issues, we're enabling sales, because more and more of our customers are going to be security aware, and they're going to want to make sure that they're buying a product that has security built in.
Would you recommend someone to build a relationship with the sales leaders in a way as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's important for sales leaders to understand what you're doing. I mean, you don't have to go into the same kind of detail you do with engineering or product, but I think they should understand, your overall objective, your strategy, the progress you're making, because that's something I think a lot of sales leaders could utilize in selling their products, to make sure that their potential customers or their renewal customers understand that you are making strides to secure your products and to protect their data, their IP, whatever is in use in the products.
Did you ever have to build the relationships with some leaders just because of their ego would be involved, not because of the metrics, but because it would make sense more politically?
I don't think I've had to do that. I'm sure that happens. I've been fortunate enough that, most of the people I've worked with in my career in the business side have, even if they didn't understand, like when I first came to them, like we were able to have conversations, and they were able to come to an understanding of what we were doing and why, and how that could help them, in their role. I've never had to deal with somebody, just for the sake of politics, but I'm also not admittedly the best at office politics.
Okay. That's yeah. Yeah, I just met with people who are great at office politics, and that's not my case, but that's why I also don't like bigger companies. But yeah, I've seen that happen, so that's why it's just interesting. And I recently had a conversation with a friend about it because yeah, it is a part sometimes of a role, especially if you want to get promoted, and like she wants to go more into the management and security role. So it's more kind of just a way of thinking. Sometimes, if you work for a really big company, do you need to do that to win some people? Moreover, from political point of view. And what are kind of some early, red flags with someone is, let's say, wants to join a new company and they want to build out, AppSec problem. In your case, you had some opportunities to build it from scratch. What were like what are the red flags when you actually can realize, okay, in this company, AppSec program doesn't have good foundations and it's going to be really hard to win people over and build something good that's long lasting as well?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's definitely something that I think about when I'm coming into a new organization. I think it's definitely part of discovery to try to find what those red flags are so that you can address them as quickly as possible. Certainly, one of the questions I ask is, if it's a new role, the engineering leaders and product leaders aware of the new role, and are they supportive of the new role? Because if you bring in another security person, another security team, and nobody's really understanding why it's happening, then that's a whole lot of groundwork that I'm going to have to do at the beginning to make sure that I'm getting their understanding and buy-in. It's, let's say, a backfill. If I'm coming in and the role already existed, the team already existed, I've got to be aware of what is the current perception of that program. Were the impacts positive? Were there negative impacts? Am I going to have to address those? I think oftentimes security teams are viewed as the team of no.
Yeah.
That's our favorite word. And
Yeah.
in engineering, that's usually like, okay, we're innovators, we're trying to make things happen, and no is not a great answer. And so I've had to deal with that, where it's like, okay, I'm looking to change that cultural relationship between security and engineering, where I often express, one, I explain my career. I'm sympathetic to the pains they're going through. I understand a little bit of their world, and just making sure that only time I'm ever going to say no is when the company wants the answer to be no to that question. If this is not how we build things, this is not what our standards are, this is not what our policy allows, then the answer is going to be no. And it's not me saying no. That's the organization saying no. I'm just communicating that to you. Otherwise, I let, you know, engineering leaders know I'm here to help you find a secure yes. And so it's working through, how could we do things differently if your initial design or proposal has some things that might put us at risk in certain ways. Then it's okay, how do we get to a secure yes to where you're able to get that product feature in place, but then I'm able to help you make sure that you're protecting data, IP, that sort of thing.
Do you have a concrete example where the proposal was too risky at the start and you had to de-risk it?
Yeah, I won't mention where or when, but
Yes, it makes sense.
I've had situations where, the status quo for building things was using basic authentication, or we're going to throw everything in the URL. And, there's just things that people don't consider. They don't understand what risk is presented by a design. It's just how they've always done it. They don't know a different way. So yeah, I'm no longer really surprised by what I see when I'm presented with a
It's not
design.
a good
It's just one of those like, hey, okay, I understand what you're trying to do. Have you considered doing it this way? Because if you do it this way, these are the things I can do to own your system or extract data or manipulate things. nobody wants that. I mean, I've never found anybody who's like, oh, I want to build something really insecure because I'm lazy. It's usually because either that's the way that things have always been done and they don't question it, or they just don't know any better. And, maybe they found the answer on Stack Exchange. And so they're just going to do what somebody said randomly on the internet. And so it's really, a good opportunity to educate people on where's a good place to get information from and how do we build things securely from the beginning.
I think that's a really good point in the sense, like, I know in my experience, when I had to build something like with the HTML SSS when I was doing project with it, I went to Stack Overflow and just tried to pick different answers out there without thinking at the start. Well, right now I think I do code less than before, and now it's a lot more like ChatGPT assisted
Yeah.
when I have to do it. But I can see that at least my knowledge, that I start to think about security, incorporated that. But like several years ago, absolutely not the case. So I think the question is like, how do we ensure that that's no longer the case? For example, should it be right, since right now, big hype, AI assisted coding. I think if you do it with Copilot, you still get some notifications, or like with tools like even Lovable where you can build directly, you get some notification of tests for security. But if you do it, with ChatGPT, there is no like recommendation to build it securely. Do you think it's responsibility of those big large AI companies to make sure that whenever someone is using their algorithms to improve their coding or build something from scratch, to have secure coding guidelines incorporated or some alerts in the tools?
It's a good question. Can see both sides of that. I mean, there's a part of me that's like, yeah, if you're going to build this and you know that that's a use case that's going to be in play, that you probably do have a responsibility to prevent garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
But I also see it as, let's say from an enterprise or organizational perspective, like if you're in an environment where you want to be using code assistance tools, let's say I've been in a lot of Microsoft environments, and so Copilot, utilize the sort of tenant sandboxed features so that your data is secure, that you're learning from models that are more in line with what your business objectives are, and you're not just going out to, something that's learning from everything, and you really have the potential of getting a whole lot of Stack Overflow like results from your inquiries. So I think organizations definitely need to be on top of that and making sure that they're understanding the risk, because, engineers are always looking for an advantage, a way to do it faster and quicker. Go to market is a big deal. So how are they going to do that? Well, if ChatGPT, OpenAI, and all these other tools are available to them, why wouldn't they try to use them to help make them faster and more effective? I think that's the part where the organization needs to understand, if you let them play everywhere, then you're opening yourself to a lot of potential risk depending upon what answers they get and what processes you have in place for code review and security scans and that sort of thing. So the wild west of software development is getting wilder.
Yeah. Sure. In the sense, like, as you mentioned, yeah, garbage in, garbage out, it's also in a sense getting wilder there,
Yeah.
because there
I
are
mean,
so many people who do not have a specifically engineering background or coding background, can build a lot of different things, or a lot of different things on top of a lot of different things. Yeah, who is responsible for that? I think it's a big question, and especially in organizations where like security teams are already kind of stretched thin, which is your case, with the ratio 1 to 300. So you already like AppSec teams are monitoring developers only, but then you suddenly have marketers who are building things. You suddenly have salespeople who are even, well, a bit less, but still might build things. So you can build their internal application or external applications. So whose then is the responsibility to monitor, those applications, which is kind of a big question as well. And then the imbalances would potentially, grow larger and larger. Like, how would you suggest, to optimize for the imbalance between the number of security people and more people actually building applications internally.
Yeah, I think few of my favorite things. One is a secure code training program, making sure that you've got engaging and quality training available for engineers, that you work with HR and product and engineering leadership to help them understand the importance of that training. For many years, we've had the buzzword of shift left in the security space. And I think that training is probably the most shift left thing you can do, is training your engineers to not only how to fix code as you bring security bugs to them, but how to not create security bugs in the first place. And so I think a secure code training program is super important. There's a lot of folks that I respect in the industry who are really passionate about security champions programs. No matter if you're working in an out of balance ratio, let's say my current state, or, I think most of the industry, we're out of balance. It's just hard to get enough AppSec professionals in an organization. And so it's really about how do you scale your program without necessarily having to bring in a whole bunch more security headcount. And I think security champions programs are a great way to do that in concert with your training programs. You find the engineers who really enjoy your secure code training program, who are really good at it, and who either have a talent for or an interest in security, working with their leadership to, maybe make some security champions that are embedded with the teams, and that you can trust them with secure code reviews, that they can be the ones in the release chain that sort of validate that, all the security steps have been taken care of. We're ready to go to production. There's also, from a tech stack perspective, making sure that you're utilizing tools empower you to be as efficient as possible, whether it be through high signal, low noise tooling or efficient automations and workflows. There's I think a lot of ways where we can, make ourselves as lean as possible and as effective as possible. Because I don't think we're ever going to get to a place, unless you're in one of those manga-like corporations where you've got all the heads you need. I think we're always going to be fighting that battle. And so it's about finding those efficiencies and those places where you can have the biggest impact for the lowest cost.
Yeah, I think it's most of the time it is a battle, especially in security, to get more headcount to validate the budget that's associated with the risk. And when we talked before, you just mentioned to implement the tools that are most efficient, on the market. When we talked before, you mentioned that you think SAST is one of the least valuable tools, and SCA is amazing. So that was your hot take. Why?
So I think I'm not saying there's no value in SAST, but I think there are other things that we can be looking to prioritize over SAST. And so, if I was looking at my security tool stack and I was trying to determine where am I going to put my focus, SAST would not be at the top of my list. And maybe it's controversial. I feel like it's probably not very controversial, but maybe.
Getting less and less, I
Yeah, I
would say.
mean, traditional, and maybe somebody's, coming up with the latest and greatest SaaS tool that blows away my paradigm. But, you're looking at tools that are looking at static code, that are modeling out how the application is going to use that code, and then trying to determine if there's a vulnerability present that way. Uh, and I think it just leaves a lot of room for error for improvement. I think it's pretty well known that even though SaaS tools have gotten better over the last decade with false positives, there's still plenty of them in there. And when you don't have the resources, who's going to do that research? Who's going to triage those items? Is it going to be put on engineering, who might not have the skill set to understand the false positive, or they might claim it's a false positive because they don't understand how it actually really works? Or is it going to be on the application security team, who might not have the resources to try to go through hundreds or thousands of findings to ensure true positives before they get passed over to the engineering team? So I just think SAST is the legacy tool for the most part, and there is value that's there, I just don't think it's the highest value that we're looking for. I mean, I think if, we're looking at how a lot of modern software it's built off of open source libraries. Estimates in every organization are different, but I've seen anywhere between 50 to 90% of the code base is open source. So if you're on the extreme end of that and 90% of your code base was open source, a SAST tool is really not going to be impactful anyway. And so, having a high quality SCA tool that's got good reachability analysis, that's looking to see if, are the functions and classes even reachable, or are they being called? How should we prioritize patching our libraries, because every app seems to have hundreds if not thousands of direct and transitive dependencies and all the vulnerabilities that go with that. Like, that's a lot to weed through, so you do need to have good quality tooling and information to help you prioritize those. But it's easier for an attacker to understand your tech stack than it is for them to figure out where that possible path traversal exists in your custom code. Like, it's going to take more for a threat actor to find that than it will be to fingerprint your application and find an exploit. And so those are the sort of things that I kind of go through as I'm thinking about, like, where would I put my prioritizations when I'm having conversations with engineering about where do we spend our time, what things do we work on first.
You would be surprised how easy it is to understand tech stack from the job descriptions and from the engineering blogs.
Yeah, OSINT is definitely a good method.
Yeah, also like on the security side as well sometimes. And so I have this new section in the podcast. And we spoke about acronyms. I don't know if that's the case. So one question: what's your least favorite security buzzword?
It changes. I
Okay,
think I think
what is it right now?
AI.
AI. Okay, why?
It used to be
You don't
machine
trust it?
learning, that was the buzzword a few years ago, and then it changed, it morphed into AI. Pretty much anything that marketing teams come up with tends to bug me. So if the
Okay.
if the marketing teams in the security space are pushing it, then that just usually becomes the thing that makes me cringe. Yeah, it changes. It's usually whatever marketing is driving in the space at the time.
Not sometimes always marketing, I would say, that drives that. There are usually, when you define that, a lot of teams are involved in those decisions. Yeah, at least in my experience, sometimes even actually tech leadership can drive that too. And then yeah, it depends. And what is your favorite book that you would recommend to someone who would love to get started in application security or just deepen their knowledge?
Yeah. I mean, we've already talked about her. Tanya Jank has got two great books. If you're interested in the application security space, her first book, Allison Bobler on application security, is fantastic. I had a team a few years ago with people who were, kind of early in their careers, and I got each one of them a copy, and I'm like, read this. This will definitely help you and set a good foundation for you. Years ago, this is an old book, and it's probably not super applicable anymore, but I mentioned Jim Manico. Early in my career, I saw his book Ironclad Java, which, I think for the language probably is got some relevance still. Maybe the frameworks have changed in a bit, but if you're working in the Java space, there's a lot of really good things in that book. It's old. It's probably like over a
Okay.
decade ago,
I will still look it up and put the link
but
in
it's
the
it's it's
comments.
it's a great book. There's been so many that have been good, but yeah, I mean, those are probably two of the ones that I've really enjoyed, and one of them being early in my career and one being more recent.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for the advice. Well, Tanya's one, the one that's a lot of people do recommend that. That's very contract. That another one, I'll definitely put the link in the podcast description so people can check it out. I think sometimes even if it's older enough, there's still some learnings that can be applicable usually today. And well, thank you so much, Sean, for coming on the podcast. It was a pleasure chatting with you, and I'm looking forward to the release of that episode.
Yeah,
Well
thanks
called
very much for having me.
AI
It's been a lot of
based
fun.
conversation. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.